Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions have been canceled for a bit, I figured I would bring book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. For all of you authors out there, or just fans of words, we'll be going inside the writing process with science fiction, fantasy, and dark pulp writers Hildy Silverman, Errick Nunnally, and Alex Shvartsman. So before we dive in, let me welcome Hildy Silverman, who spent 12 years as editor-in-chief of Space and Time magazine and is a short fiction author. Some of her recent fiction has appeared in Baker Street Irregulars 2, Camelot 13, Release the Virgins, The Divided States of America, and Love, Murder, and Mayhem, edited by yours truly. Errick Nunnally is a Krav Maga and Muay Thai kickboxing black belt, who isn't, who served in the Marine Corps before going to art school. His dark pulp fiction has appeared in several anthologies, including FIA Literary Magazine, Lamplight, Transcendent, Manarchies of Mao, The Final Summons, Protectors 2, and Nightlight Podcast. He is also the author of the novels Lightning Wears a Red Cape, Blood for the Sun, and All the Dead Men. And last but not least, Alex Shvartsman is the author of more than 120 short stories published in Analog, Nature, Strange Horizons, and elsewhere. He won the WSFA Small Press Award for Short Fiction in 2014 and was a two-time finalist for the Canopus Award for Excellence in Interstellar Fiction. His political fantasy novel, Iridian's Crown, was published in 2019, and he has edited more than a dozen anthologies, including the long-running Unidentified Funny Object series, and is the editor-in-chief of Future Science Fiction Digest. Woo! Okay, so where are you guys tonight? What city?
Somerset, New Jersey.
Okay, Alex?
I'm here in Brooklyn, New York.
And Errick?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Providence, Rhode Island, right on. Okay, so for those of you tuning in, feel free to send me questions in the chat box throughout the hour, and we'll get to some of them at the end. So let's jump in. For all the writers out there and those who are interested in kind of how it all works, tonight we'll be diving into the ins and outs, the ups and downs and roundabout ways we author extract even the kernel of an idea, transmute and transfer those ideas from our brains, and finally into a format where the readers can have a look. So let's start with a question all writers deal with. And Errick, I'm going to start with you. Are you a plotter or a pantser? You know, do you take copious notes, write outlines and character cards, or do you just wing it? You know, writing by the seat of your pants, or as we writers say, pantsing it?
It depends, actually. For a novel, I need to plot it out. If I don't, I might be able to wing it for a chapter or two, but, trying to figure out where to get 50, 60,000 words, how to get from point A to point B, I need to plot that out. For a short story, I'll pants it.
Alex?
I am a plantser. I'm right there in the middle of the two strategies.
A plantser, so, I like that.
I'm a plantser. So what I do is when I begin writing a story, whether it be a novel-length story or a flash fiction, I have to know several things. I have to know where the story begins. I have to know exactly where the story ends, and maybe a few major points in the middle. How I get from point A to point B to point C to the final point, that's all pantsing. And I try to make sure that every scene I write gets me to that next point that I know I need to get to, and that's what keeps me from getting in the weeds too far. But I feel like the discovery process is a really important part of writing for me, because I end up surprising myself a lot sometimes, and keep adding little bits of world building and plot that would not have been there if I just outlined the whole thing.
And Hildy, what about you?
I'd say I'm more of a pantser. I usually come up with the idea, and maybe I'll have an idea for how it opens up, but then as I'm writing, it unfolds almost like I'm watching it happen. So sometimes the direction I thought the story would take, it just goes in a completely different direction because my characters just don't want to go in the original direction I thought. Usually it works out. Sometimes I get a little lost and have to redo and start over, but yeah, mostly pantsing.
So that's funny. So I don't know how you guys started out this way. Were you always like this? Because we've all been at this for quite a while. I know for me, I used to plot a lot more than I do now. And I found that once I think I'm a little bit more like Alex, once I have a general structure and I pretty much always know how it's going to end, I need room to sort of let things kind of go where they go. Because if I'm too structured, then it's harder for the magic to happen if there's not space to breathe. What about you? Were you always this way? Did you sort of evolve your process over time? Or is it still evolving?
Which you?
So, Hildy.
Oh, and I think I've always kind of done it this way. It's just the way I write. I'll come up with the idea, the concept, or a character, or something that needs to go onto paper. And I've tried plotting out, doing the outline, having everything very precise, but I just can't stick to it. When I start writing, it just never goes in that direction. So it's a waste of my time for me personally to do it.
Alex, what about you?
I've experimented with doing it the other ways. I pretty much started doing what I'm doing now, and I came back around to it pretty quickly, because if I sort of plan everything out within an inch of its life, it's just not fun. Writing becomes just a job at that point. So I need something to keep me going, some sort of discovery there. And if I don't plan at all, then I just get stuck and I'm staring at a page. I don't know where I'm going. So I kind of pretty quickly discovered that this is the method that really works for me. And having said that, it doesn't mean that that's the right method for everyone. I mean, everybody has to kind of discover their own way. There's no right or wrong way to write your story, as long as you end up with a story.
Yeah, you two sound like chaos personified to me. I couldn't, I just couldn't wing it. I need to have like just a little chapter synopsis all the way to the end, and I'll have character sheets, and I might fill some of that stuff out as I go. But if I don't keep notes and have references and things like that handy, I just cannot keep track of it. I can't remember everything. So yeah, definitely. I'm not obsessive about it. I know some people that keep files, they've got color-coded things that they work with, and that's a bit much. That would be too much of a distraction, I think. I think like what you were saying, Alex, of having, it's just a little bit further than what you do, I think, in having, knowing that this is what happens in A, this is what happens in B, this is what happens in C, and then I can write in between all of those lines. It just seems to work best for me.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more like you, where I do take some, I'll write out chunks of dialogue in advance. I'll have some structure pieces. I'll have some character arcs that I know I want to have throughout, and I can refer to them. I like to have some guideposts along the way, but I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. Okay, so let's just sort of get down to into our habits, right? We're creatures of habit. We're creatures of skill. So when you actually write, where are you? Where's your writing perch, or do you have one? Errick.
Right here. This is what I've got right now. I'm kind of in the corner in the back of the house. There's a hutch that folds down, and I work right here. And what's been really weird since this has started is I got really used to sort of writing in the margins of my life, right? Because I go to work during the day. There's a commute. There's dinner, there's family stuff, there's other responsibilities. So in between all those things is when I would write. And now we're home all the time, virtually home all the time. And it's been kind of a drag on writing, and I think it's because it's an adjustment to needing to be more disciplined about it when I have been unable to be disciplined about it. Now, given the opportunity to be disciplined about it, it's kind of a challenge.
Hildy?
So in the before 4 times, I used to be one of those people who would go to Starbucks. I needed to get out of my home so that I wouldn't be distracted. I wouldn't have the urge to do some laundry in parallel or do whatever 1,000 chores were around. Obviously now that's no longer an option. So again, much like Errick, here it is. I'm right here on my sofa and the writing's happening just right here. And actually it's probably good for me because it has forced me to become more disciplined. I have to stop myself from doing all the other things in parallel. I can't just run away from them. So I'm trying to be very good. I turn off the social media. I turn off every distraction and just focus on what I'm writing. It's definitely harder though. It's a little more difficult than when I could just pick up and go someplace and cut myself off and there was nothing else to do but sip my tea and write.
Is there anybody that can like randomly show up and that's what I get.
No, not anymore. Now, when I was younger and I was married and I had a young child in the house, absolutely, and I had a dog. For various reasons, none of those things are here anymore, so it's just me. So there's no one's popping up to interrupt.
Literally.
Yes.
Pop up.
So Alex, how about you? What's your spot?
About 90% of everything I've ever written is on my desktop in a tiny little office in our apartment, which is a room the size of about 3 coffins. So it's really small, it's drafty, it's hot in the summer, it's cold in the winter, but it has the advantage of being 2 closed doors away from the rest of the apartment. And so I can kind of tune out the noise and the 2 pets and the kid and, and get a little bit of writing time, because I tend to do best with no music, no sound, no interruptions. Just the hardest part for me is to get going. Once I get a few sentences in, a few paragraphs in, I can keep writing. But just diving into that, it's kind of like getting into a pool. It feels cold at the beginning, but once you're in there, it's warm and comfortable. That's how writing is for me. I need to force myself to dive in, and then I can keep going. I have tried writing in Starbucks once. For somebody who's willing to come out and do these panels, I have this weird discomfort level of people looking over my shoulder as I write. So I almost never write on a plane or in Starbucks or anything like that. But I have done it just to prove to myself that I was able to put out publishable work in those circumstances. It's just not my preference.
It's fine, because I know. So has it affected you? So I know for me, before COVID, I would either, at one point in my life, I got up early to write, but that's exhausting. And then I have kids, so I write at night. I like a structure, but then, it interrupts. So I write, grab time on the train, send myself emails and whatnot. So now in this new world that we're in, both before this and now, are you a nighttime writer, a daytime writer, a morning? What's your sweet spot throughout the day? If you can plan it out, what's your most productive time of day to be writing, Alex? Errick, you're a little dark. See if you can brighten up your space.
Morning, about 20 minutes after I've had my coffee. Coffee gets a co-writer credit on everything I do. I definitely need that boost. Having said that, I have written at night. I actually do better editing and proofreading in the evenings. I think I'm more creative around 10 o'clock at night. But I also know that I need to be fresh and I need to be kind of ready to go to write, at my most efficient. And that's what I try to do in the morning. So I try to structure my day. I do go to work. So even now, I'm not actually stuck at home. My day job calls to me. So I try to get up early enough and get a couple of hours of writing, editing, any sorts of creative work while I'm still fresh, because by the time I come home from the day job, at that point, I'm only good for just the sort of minutia of like sending out contracts and dealing with, maybe galleys and things like that. So stuff that's not super creative, because my brain is mush at that point.
How about you, Hildy?
So part of the challenge I've been running into is I am working from home right now, my day job. So that during the day is focused on that. The challenging part is a lot of what I do during the day also involves writing, albeit not fiction writing. It's a whole different kind of writing. It's technical, it's medical, it's, marketing, all of that sort of work. So if I have a story to write, it's in the evening, but I have to take a break in between to shift my brain from factual research, terminology, all that kind of writing, back to fun fiction, it's creative in a different way writing. And that's been tough because it's in the same place. Here I am writing the same stuff on the same laptop. And as anyone who works on a computer all day can say, it's kind of the last thing you want to do after having been on the computer writing all day. Let's go
Sure.
back on the computer and write all night. But yes, that's usually nighttime or weekends.
Errick, what about you?
Errick, your mic. There you go.
I struggle with writing at night for exactly that reason, since I'm doing graphic design work during the days, and I prefer to do work in the morning. But my wife and I have developed this habit of exercising in the morning. So I've found out that, like, if I don't exercise early enough, by the time 9 a.m. rolls around, there's like this anxiety about work because I'm working from home. So at around 9 a.m., I start, worrying about keeping up with the jobs that I have in the queue and stuff like that. But in the morning, I feel really jazzed to create things or to do things.
I'm the same. I'm a morning writer myself. So let me ask you, Errick. So while we're on it, do you set goals for yourself? Writing goals. Some people say, "Oh, I need to write 2,000 words a day, 500 words a day, 10,000 words a week." Do you have daily, weekly, monthly writing goals for yourself, or do you just finish when you finish?
I don't have goals like that. What I prefer is if what I'm working on has a home or is intended to be somewhere, a deadline is what I work best against. So, if I wrote my second novel, the first novel took well over a year. It took a couple years because I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. And then the second one, it had a home, and I did that in 6 months. So knowing that has somewhere to be, or that it's wanted somewhere, makes it a lot easier to just kind of make it happen, as opposed to having particular goals. I could do the calculations, but I don't know, some days you write 500 words and other days, 2,000 comes out of you.
Alex, how about you?
I'm 100% with Errick on this. If not for the deadlines, I would not write very much at all. But they don't have to be deadlines that are given to me by the editor, though that's preferred. They could be self-imposed deadlines. I could want to finish a short story or a scene because I have a writer's group coming up. I could set myself a goal of finishing a story because I have another project that's due and I know that I'll need to dedicate the following week to that project. So I kind of fool my brain into believing there's a deadline even when there isn't one.
Yes.
And I usually can squeeze a little bit of extra productivity out of myself that way. But yeah, about 1,000, 1,500 words is a pretty good writing day for me, fresh words. I've had days that were a lot more than that, but they're rare. And yeah, I'll take 500 words on a slower day, and I'll still be satisfied with that.
Hildy, how about you?
I'm going to echo what Errick and Alex said. I work better to a deadline. It's one of the reasons I like writing for anthologies so much, because it's very set. This one is due, go. And it keeps me on track. If I'm writing something that's not for a particular market, I'm pretty good about, setting my own deadline, like Alex was saying, just sort of a self-imposed. You want to get it to this place by X time, or they only have a limited open window and you want to aim for that market. But it helps to have some form of deadline. Otherwise, I can be a terrible, terrible procrastinator.
I'm with all of you guys. I need to know, as Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. I need to know when the thing is due, and then I build backwards, and then I start forwards again, and then I build it out that way. All right, so let me ask you about this. So we've all had these moments. You just have that burst of inspiration. You wake up in the middle of the night from a dream, your heart's pumping, you have that idea, you're taking a shower, you're taking a walk, you're running errands. Do you jot notes down however you can, wherever you can, or do you promise yourself that you'll remember later? It's Hildy.
I don't trust my brain to remember anything at this age. So no. Those days are over. No, I write it down. And I try to I have little notebooks everywhere, including beside the bed. So, you have that sudden thing at like 3 a.m. You scroll it down, can't read what you wrote, or it's nonsense, but it's there. It's there. I could go back to it. I have typed things in the notes on my phone during the day. If I'm out, if I'm walking, it's on there. Like they're everywhere. So yeah, no, I don't trust myself to remember a damn thing. I know I've had ideas hit me, and I was like, oh my God, that's so great. I could do so much with this. And then 4 or 5 hours later, I'm gonna get to, and it's gone. It's just gone.
Errick, how about you?
I've ended up with little notebooks and things in a lot of different places. There's notes on my phone for, you know, just wandering around, and I don't have a notebook and a pen with me, but you know, you've got your phone. I've also got so a couple of the books I've written deal with someone who's got memory problems, and I actually started to adopt mnemonics to remember things in situations where I don't have anything with me, and I can't, like I'm driving, I can't just grab my phone and do something, and pulling over seemed a little excessive, and you know, I start coming up with rhymes or acronyms or things just to force myself to remember when I get somewhere to write it down. But yeah, there's these little ideas that are kind of strewn all over the place, and if I'm like, I don't know what I want to do today, or if there's some magazine or something I would like to submit something to, it's time to sort of go through all those, open up all the notebooks and all the plot files and all these different things and see if something fires back up.
Alex, how about you?
Like Errick, I mostly keep these notes digital. So I use Google Keep, which I can access on any of my devices. And I will jot things down, and they don't even have to be story ideas. They could be one-liners, just a line that came to mind, and I thought, I think it's a good turn of phrase that I want to use.
Mm-hmm.
I write a lot of humor, so sometimes I'll be with my friends and I'll just make a joke that'll make everybody laugh. And I'll be like, hey, one of my characters could say that, and I'll have no shame. I'll pull out my phone and I'll type it up for myself in the middle of just like hanging out with friends. So thankfully, they like me enough to not to tease me too much about it.
That's good.
You're constantly rooting conversations. You're breaking the flow of everything.
I do all the same thing you guys do. One of the things that I do is sometimes I'll be out walking the dog and I'll have this idea, and I don't always bring my phone with me, and I don't want to forget. So I'm out there talking it out loud over and over and over so I don't forget. And people are looking at me across the street. Who's that guy talking to? I'm like, hey, it's all good. But
I thought you were going to say you jot it down on the dog. You know.
Yeah. So let me ask you guys. So when you're writing, what comes first for you in your development process? Is it the character? Is it setting? Is it plot? Is it just you see an ending, a big move? Like where do you start, Errick?
I'm such a big fan of. I grew up in a kind of isolated from many books. Like I wasn't surrounded by a lot of readers. So, you know, I didn't have a bunch of friends who were like, hey, check this out. I just read this. I just read that. And for a long time, a lot of the movies I enjoyed, I actually didn't know that they were adapted from books. So I've got kind of like a movie running in my head. Whenever I'll see a scene of something and I'll go, oh, well, that's really cool. But, you know, how do we get there? And who is that? And, you know, what would make this make sense? And how does it fit into a bigger thing? So I usually have a few scenes in my head that play like a movie or something, but then, you know, I have to think more in depth than what just this cool, shiny thing is to get to it.
Alex, how about you?
For me, it's the cool, shiny thing that often comes first. But also sometimes I will read or watch or listen to something and I will want to argue with it. And the best way to argue with it is to present my own sort of version or, you know, my own take on a similar concept. So I've had stories that would sort of riff off of Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, or would riff off of other concepts and ideas that are common in science fiction and fantasy, but I would always want to subvert those tropes and kind of surprise people and present something different. I just turned in the story to an invitation anthology that sort of took the idea of Baby Yoda, or like sort of the whole like you have a child and you're traveling with them, and completely subverted it. So, because it's been so popular in science fiction and fantasy lately, between Avatar and Wolf and Cobb and all those things, that I just said, well, why can't we do something different with this? And that alone kind of grew into an 8,000 word story, which had a lot of other stuff going on, but that sort of was the kernel that the little thing that you planted and the whole tree grew out of it.
Hildy, what about you?
So for me, it's usually the plot first, or an idea, a concept, like what if X happened, or what if Y was a real thing? Some idea, and then it builds out from there. Well, what would happen in a world where this was the way things were? And then, well, what's the story I could tell in that world? And I try to not to go with usually my first idea, because it's usually the most simplistic, the most expected. Like Alex, I like to subvert it a little bit and play around and do something different. And then for me, characters almost always dead last. Like, okay, now I need humans or some sort of beings, and then I put them in there and send them through the world.
So for you, it's sort of the characters are just they're token pieces to advance your idea.
They start out that way. I try not to leave them that way, because that makes for pretty flat, boring characters. But
you don't write flat, boring characters.
Yeah,
all intended to die.
Yeah, I just name them cannon fodder, send them on their way.
So speaking of which, so no writer, at least not that I know of anyway, excels at every aspect of writing. So which one gives you the most trouble? Is it action sequences, emotional arcs, pacing, world building, continuity? What?
Point at someone.
Oh, Hildy, sorry.
Sorry. For me, my biggest challenge is description. I will write a whole story and go back and read it, and I've described nothing. I do not, I get action. I can give you every move the characters make. I've got your dialogue down, all of that. But describing the room that the characters are in, or, whatever scenery needs to be described, I have to usually do that in edit, not the first time through. It doesn't come naturally to me. I don't know why. I guess maybe I'm not that visually oriented. I'm more interested in the characters and what's happening to them. But of course, they can't do that in as they call it, the white room, where you kind of write them in a vacuum. So I always have to go back and say, okay, well, what details do need to be here so people can see the setting? So that one's a real challenge for me.
Alex, what about you?
For me, it's actually the fact that my protagonists tend to internalize their emotions too much. And I think it's because I do that. And so when I write my characters, I think I'm describing how they feel sufficiently, but consistently beta reader feedback for me says, well, why can't we see, how is this person feeling about this right now? They should be enraged. They should be this, they should be that. And I'm like, well, yeah, I thought I did that, but not enough. So I need to kind of go out and kind of make it pulpier in a way, like, because I always feel like, I try to be a little bit more subtle with their emotions, and often that doesn't work. So I need to be conscious about it when I do my rewrites.
Errick, how about you?
It probably like a very intimate sex scenes. That would be the thing that, I think I've recently discovered this too, because in the book that I'm writing, there's the main character has their first experience, and it's very different than a couple of adults just consenting and doing something that they have done before. So I was like, wow, this is really weird. I'm having a lot of trouble with it. It took me a few weeks to work through it. And then, looking back on other things, I'm not writing romance, and I don't want to tip into erotica necessarily. And I don't want it to be unrealistic. So it suddenly becomes something that requires a whole lot more thought and attention than I think it does initially.
Interesting. So Alex, you had mentioned beta readers, and I want to get into this. And just as a quick note to the folks who are listening in, if you have questions for me or anyone on the panel, feel free to send them to me in the chat box, and we'll get to some of them at the end of the segment. So you've written your story, short story, novel, what have you. do you look for a second set of eyes on your work, or do you just trust yourself to be your own editor? Alex, since you brought it up.
So I started out really committed to the whole workshopping thing. And I used to have every single story. I would send it to a whole bunch of beta readers, to a whole bunch, you know, sometimes multiple rounds, get a bunch of opinions, etc. As I sort of leveled up and advanced in this whole writing thing, I've been using that less and less. But I still have every single thing that I write. I still have it read by at least one trusted beta reader, because we are not necessarily the best judges of our own work, and sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. Sometimes a scene that is crystal clear in my head may be confusing to the reader, and you need an outside eye, you know, on that. Plus, you also want to see your own typos sometimes as well. So having a minor proofread is really, really helpful as well. So depending on the complexity and sort of the you know, what I'm trying to do with the story, usually at least one set of eyes, but sometimes a bunch of sets of eyes if I'm struggling a little bit.
How about you, Hildy? What about you?
It depends. If I'm writing a story for an anthology or for some sort of requested story, no, I just do it myself. And I trust that the editor who wants the story will work with me if I miss the boat on something. And since it's short fiction, that's not such a huge deal. You know, if I need to rewrite this or edit that, whatever, then it's fine. But normally I take care of that myself. However, if I was writing not on spec and just sending something out there, or if I was ever to write a novel, I would want another set of eyes on it. Absolutely. There's, as someone who was an editor for years, I know you miss, no matter how good you are, you're going to miss things in your own work. You know, you just do, because you see it clearly in your head, but the reader's not in your head. So, you know, you miss things like my scenery issues. So,
Errick, what about you?
I think there's one or two people, maybe three, that I really trust to read just about anything, but that I do, and they do help me all the time with things like structure, plot, pacing, characterization, even description, like what you were talking about, Hildy. Is, you know, like, oh, you wrote this in a white room. You know, maybe there's an environment you want to add here. But if I'm wandering outside of what I'm most comfortable with reading, if I'm kind of outside of my wheelhouse, like let's say I have an idea for a Western, you know, I'm going to want to contact this other friend that I know either reads a lot of Westerns or writes a lot of Western stuff, just to take a look at it and give me some advice, or tell me, do they feel like I got the vibe right, et cetera, et cetera. So, depends on what got produced, I think.
So I want to go a little bit deeper into this. So this is a nuance that's important to me, because I use an editor on almost everything I write. Sometimes on short fiction I don't, but almost on everything, because I can't catch everything. So giving feedback is a skill unto itself, and not everyone has it, even if they're well-intentioned. When you ask a beta reader or reading group members to read your work, what exactly do you ask from them? What kind of feedback are you looking for? We'll start with Alex.
So first, there's a difference between a beta reader and a critique partner.
For sure.
A beta reader is essentially someone that is reading your story, and they are your target audience, and they're essentially in the same way as a gamer would beta test a game. They're reading the thing, and if they trip over something is unclear to them, they get bored at certain points, that's what I want to hear from. You know, those are the details that are relevant to me. If you have a critique partner, I have a couple that are my consistent critique partners that I've been working with for years and years and years, and I read almost everything that they write and vice versa. And those guys I trust with a lot more detail. I trust with them to understand they have the same sort of toolkit or a better toolkit than I do when it comes to plotting and pacing and things like that. And so they can tell me, okay, you know, these are some of the issues I have with the story structure. These are some of the issues I have with the scene, with this character motivation. So I expect a much more sort of a insider level of feedback from them than I do from the beta readers.
Hildy, what about you?
Yeah, I would, if I need some assistance from someone, it depends what I'm looking for. If I'm writing characters that are outside my personal experience, I would ask a friend or a critique partner if they could read it through and make sure I've handled things in a reasonable way, that the character sounds realistic, that I've described them in a good way, things like that. If I want like a proofreader or something, yeah, I have some folks I've worked with before as far as critiques that have editorial experience that could go through and catch my boo-boos. So that's helpful. I guess it depends on the story and what's in it. If I was writing about a culture that's different than mine, I'm going to go to somebody probably different than the person I would go to just to give it a read through and tell me they were entertained in a general sort of way.
Errick, what about you?
I think we're pretty much on the same page with this one. You know, I think, well, I should say, I think there are like, I think 3 people that I really trust to kind of read anything that I write and critique it. And everyone else is sort of for different reasons. But I never quite thought of it the way that you said, Alex. But yeah, beta readers are somebody who is given it a test run. It's like, did you enjoy it? Was there, you know, did everything seem snappy? Were there any snafus? Did you get to the end and was it fun? Like, I don't want to hear about what you think about the pacing or the structure or any of those types of things. So yeah, it's like a really small group of people, I think, that I will work with to get something to where we both think it's really good. And I think we do that because these aren't folks that we just met. We've only known a couple of months or something. It's people we've known for years who have been reading our stuff for years, and vice versa sometimes.
So let me ask you, so this is something that I'm curious to get your feedback on. So I find that many authors will ask for honest feedback, but secretly they just want to be told that their work is great. And they actually resent honest feedback if it's not what they want to hear. What's your take on it, Hildy?
Yeah, I've had this happen way too often. So because my background was in editing, I've had people come to me and say, oh, yeah, read it, you know, I trust you to give me good feedback. Read this over, let me know. And I'll spend the time, I have spent this happen more than once, I'm sad to say. I've spent the time going through and really, you know, thinking over, here's where you could do this way, this doesn't sound quite right, here's where, you know, just suggestions, I think you could take this up a level. Wrote this whole big, beautiful thing, and they'll never talk to me again. Sometimes they just wanted someone who was published or who was an editor and published a magazine to say, this is perfect, this is the greatest thing I've ever read, send it out into the wild and enjoy your Hugo. So yeah, it's something, I don't know that you can gauge it well, because a few of these people have started out saying the right things, like, no, I really want your honest feedback. I want to make this as good as it can be. And then you give it to them and they're like, yeah, okay, well, never talking to you again.
I didn't expect a line edit.
Errick, what about you?
I've never edited things. I don't think of myself that way. I consider myself actually a terrible editor, and I try to. I don't know. I've never had that happen, but I always look at stories. First of all, did I enjoy it, and second of all, like, did it make sense? So I'm kind of looking at it from that perspective, and whatever feedback I give will have examples. Like I think I managed to avoid that emotional punch.
Okay. Fair enough. Errick, yeah. Alex, what about you?
So, I mean, we all like a pat on the back, right? It's ego-soothing, it's nice, but ultimately it's useless because we want to make the story as strong as possible. So to get upset at somebody who is criticizing parts of your story is counterproductive, to say the least. I also have sort of this unique, well, not unique, maybe just in our case, but an additional sort of challenge to me in that English is my third language. So I kind of need that extra, that extra boost a little bit, because there are things that I'll get wrong when it comes to weird shit that didn't happen in the other languages that I speak, like the past perfect tense, which still doesn't make any sense to me. And every once in a while, I will catch those same things in other people's writing, but I'll get them wrong in my own. So at a bare minimum, a good copy edit is an absolute necessity. And I actually get upset at magazines and anthologies that don't copy edit rigorously. They'll come back and they'll be like, oh, no issues, we'll just publish it as is. And I'm like, well, you know what? I know that if I sent this to a different magazine, they would return this to me with a sea of red. And so that's what I want from you guys.
Well, all right, that was great. But now it's time to spin the wheel. So
Okay.
I got a little surprise for you. So I've got 7 categories, and here they are. It's year 1, Bible studies, stranger in a strange land, silver screen, shock horror, snack time, and guilty pleasure. We're going to spin the wheel, and what you get is what you play.
Okay.
Eric, you're up first. You ready?
No.
Well, you're getting it, so all right. You landed on silver screen. Okay, so what's a great book to movie translation?
That's both a great book and a great movie translation.
A great book, or a book that translated into a great movie, even if you thought the movie was better than the book.
Huh. Like the first thing that came to mind was the girl with the dragon tattoo, but I felt like the movie, like you said, the movie translation was better than the book.
All right, fair enough. Alex, you're up next. All right, for you, we got guilty pleasure. So, what books do you read just because they're fun?
I like stuff that's just space opera or kind of urban fantasy, that sort of thing. Simon R. Green in particular, because he does both really, really, really well. So the Deathstalker series or some of his urban fantasy books, but generally, John Scalzi, lots of lots of sort of like adventure books that are not particularly deep necessarily, but they're just fun.
Okay, all right. And Hildy,
Oh, God.
your turn. You ready?
Yeah, I think so.
What do we got? And you landed on snack time. So, what comfort food do you eat while you're writing?
Oh, that's a good one. I am one for the salty snacks. So if I have the munchies, it's probably going to be tortilla chips and salsa. Which can
Okay.
be really messy with a keyboard. Yes, it is.
All right, fair. Thanks, guys. That was great. Now, given that we're all in the writing business, let's go to our advice column. So we're going to start with Errick. What's the best and the worst writing advice someone has ever given you personally, or that you've heard given to others?
I think the worst advice I've gotten is write what you know, because you can learn anything well enough to, do enough research and do enough consulting to write about just about anything. But not everybody should be writing about everything. So there's kind of a tap dance there. I think the best advice that I would give, however, is to be an adult, so that when you get feedback that you don't like, you need to understand that not all of that feedback needs to be taken. You could do half of it, a quarter of it, some of it, none of it. Like, be an adult. You'll be fine.
All right, Alex, same question. Best and worst advice.
When I was a baby writer, I joined this online critique group, and pretty much the very first story that I posted on there and I got feedback back on was a 2-page email, which basically explained in great and boring detail over the course of those 2 pages why one should never open their story with dialogue. That was, not only was it terrible advice, but it also taught me that random people on the internet will sometimes not give you the best possible writing advice. I still have that email. I still have that email, and I greatly enjoy telling the story while protecting the names of the innocent and the guilty. But yeah, that's sometimes you get really terrible advice, and the best advice is to always know that all writing advice is meant to be taken in moderation. When they say cut the adverbs, it doesn't mean cut every single adverb. When they say do not use too much exposition, it does not mean they should never have any exposition. You should never explain anything in your story. Everything is okay in moderation. It's like salt. You got to use salt in your cooking, just don't use too much.
Fair enough. All right, Hildy, what about you?
The worst was probably all around show don't tell. When I also started out, you know, with an online group I found trying to find my way in the writing world, and people kept insisting in this group that you just have to show everything. But especially when you're writing short fiction, if you do that, your short fiction is going to be a novel. You can't show everything, nor should you show everything, because some things don't need to be shown. You don't need the person to get up out of their chair, describe each step they take, and how they open the door to get them from point A to point B. You know, you have to know where. Sometimes a little telling is just fine and dandy, and in fact preferred. So that was one on the negative side. The positive side is pretty similar to what Errick and Alex were saying, that at some point you have to trust your gut, and that if somebody gives you feedback and it's really sticking in your craw, it just doesn't go, it's either subverting your vision of the story or of a character, and it's changing it in a way that's going to make you unhappy with it. You got to trust your instincts. You got to trust your gut and say, that's not my story. That may be the way you would want your version of this story to go, but it's not my story. And stick to your guns.
Fair enough. Absolutely. All right. So we have a little bit of time. I'm going to take some questions that the audience has sent in. So this one, we're going to start with Alex. So what would you advise those who are starting to write? The best way to start? Do you workshop, help? How should someone get started?
Yeah, workshopping is really a good idea for people who are starting out because not only will they get feedback on their work, which is invaluable, writing in the vacuum is really, really tough, but they will also build long-lasting relationships. I'm still friends with many of the people who were among my very, very early critique partners. And we are not necessarily critiquing each other's work because some of them are too busy. Their careers have just skyrocketed, so they don't have the time for this sort of thing. But we're still close friends, and we're still kind of we came up together, and having that is really valuable along with the critique group. But mostly, don't get discouraged. Rejection is something that is part of writing, and you have to develop a little bit of a thick skin about rejection. And understand that at every single level, even the absolute top pros will get their work rejected at times. That's not a big problem. You just got to keep writing and keep submitting.
All right. So here's another question. Which is more enjoyable for everyone? The initial draft or the revising? Hildy.
For me, the initial draft is the most fun because I have to turn off my inner editor, not always easy to do, and just go through the story. And I find then you feel very free, you take chances, you play around, and it's just this free-for-all of writing. And then, of course, comes the rewrites and the edits and the rewrites and the edits and the rewrites and the edits, which can get a little tedious, but of course are necessary to craft an actual story. But for pure fun, it's that first draft.
Errick?
Yeah, I totally agree with Hildy. Like you can't get as good as the first time. It just isn't going to happen. Adding things sometimes can be as fun, but revision and edits and having that kind of care is a little less fun than just running through the whole thing.
Alex?
I may be a weirdo when it comes to this, but I actually really like revision because it seems like a lot less work. I feel like I've done the hard work in the first draft, and revision is where I get to have fun and like craft the sentences to make the story sound better, and that's where I get to do all the cool fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually in Alex's camp. My first draft is just word vomit. I just want to get the stuff on the page. I don't want to lose my momentum. I don't want to lose my rhythm. I mean, I still like the thrill of the experimentation and the mystery and the magic that comes. And I'll agree with you, Errick, there is kind of nothing that better than your first in that sense. But I really like to dive in and sculpt away and piece it together. And sort of that's where the refinement comes in. So I love that part of it too. All right, we're going to take a couple more and then we're going to wrap up. All right, so to the panel. So has your writing process, oh, we already kind of did that one already. So Alex, I'd like to see some more Coffee Corp stories from you at some point. What's the next novel or story you got coming out?
I actually have a story coming out today. It's called Choice of the Conquered, and it is in the current issue of Galaxy's Edge magazine. I'm not sure if they've uploaded the issue yet. They're bi-monthly, so it should go live sometime today if they don't get delayed too much. And the story is very, very topical because it deals with this really fascist government and people who they are oppressing, fighting against them. So I think it's rather. I wrote the story a while back, but it just happens to be very topical to come out now.
So we got one for Errick. Is Errick happy with the scope of diverse sci-fi these days, or should it go further? Does it seem to be getting its due?
Man, that's actually a tough question. It's something probably best answered individually because I don't have my eyes on the whole industry. And I think what's difficult is the volume of stuff that's out there and what gets bubbled up. I guess the short answer is I'm going to say no, it's not. And I'm going to say no, it's not because the things that are still becoming like the national bestseller that everyone is familiar with are still not as diverse as the amount of stuff that's really out there. So I think once those systems erode, best word I can think of, once those systems erode enough that they can be replaced with a more diverse set of decision makers, that's when we'll really see something that's appropriate for this country, I think.
All right, that was great, guys. It's been a great hour. So before we wrap up, it's time for some shameless promotion. So, Hildy, let's start with you. What book or project do you want to share with the folks who are listening here?
Well, the one that's out right now is Dystopian States of America. All the proceeds go to the ACLU, edited by Matt Bechtel. So that was a real honor to be a part of that. The next thing I have coming out is actually from the folks at Crazy 8. Mary Fan edited. It's called Badass Moms. That one was a lot of fun to write, and I think that's coming out this month, right? July. Yes,
Yeah.
So later this month.
Yep, it'll be out soon. All right, Alex, what about you?
So my first novel came out last year. It's called Eridanus Crown, and it's still my only novel-length work that's out, although I have collections and short stories galore. So if you like political fantasy in the vein of Game of Thrones, but it's all in a single book with an actual ending, check it out.
All right, and Errick.
Coincidentally, I also have a story in the Dystopian States of America, but I'd like to point out Uniform in Faya Literary Magazine, which seems to be getting some pretty good attention, but I need to finish the edits on All the Dead Men, which is a sequel to Blood for the Sun, and that'll be out later this month.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone who showed up today. So thanks to Hildy, to Errick, and to Alex for a great show. And thanks to everyone who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. And if sci-fi mystery is your game, you've come to the right place, because I am thrilled to announce that my newest novel, Crackle and Fire, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic private eye Angela Hardwick, is now available for pre-sale on Amazon as an ebook, with both the ebook and the paperback available in September, published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, thanks, guys. You are great, and I'm going to see you all next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
See you guys. Bye-bye.